Here's what's coming up on The World Today. World Food Programme completes first food distribution in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. North Korea spy satellite launch fails as country plans to try again. And NATO to send 700 more troops to contain the Kosovo violence. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. We begin today in Sudan, where reports say the Sudanese army has suspended its participation in ceasefire talks with its paramilitary rival. According to a government official, the army took the decision because the rebels have never implemented any one of the provisions of a short-term ceasefire, which requires their withdrawal from hospitals and residential buildings. Both the army and the Rapid Support Forces have not commented on the said withdrawal. Both sides had agreed to extend a week-long ceasefire deal by 5 days just before it was due to expire late on Monday. Meanwhile, Sudan's Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan appeared in a video on Tuesday greeting soldiers and delivering a speech. In the video, he tells them that the army had agreed to ceasefire extension to ease citizens' access to services. The warring parties agreed to extend a week-long ceasefire deal by 5 days just before it was due to expire on Monday. And the truce was brokered and is being remotely monitored by Saudi Arabia and the United States, who has reported violations by both sides. Leaders of the army and the RSF had held the top positions on Sudan's ruling council since former leader Omar al-Bashir was toppled during a popular uprising in 2019. In the meantime, the UN World Food Programme has announced a major breakthrough in Sudan, where the aid agency has delivered food to families trapped in the war-torn country's capital city, Khartoum, the first time this is being done since fighting broke out. Speaking from the city of Port Sudan, the agency's country director in Sudan, Eddie Rowe, warned that food shortages could worsen as the lean season is fast approaching. The WFP is planning to reach 5.9 million people across Sudan over the next 6 months.
Distribution of food assistance to Khartoum started on Saturday, the 27th of May, while we were able to provide food assistance to 15,000 Sudanese, both in the Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces controlled areas in which is part of the Khartoum metropolitan area. Quite apart from the assessed 16 million people who would find it very difficult to afford a meal a day, this conflict, compounded by the hunger season, would increase the food insecure population by about 2.5 million people who definitely would slip into the hunger category in the coming months.
More on the humanitarian situation in Sudan. About 17,000 metric tons of food aid have been lost to looting. The United Nations and aid groups say despite the truce, they have struggled to get bureaucratic approvals and security guarantees to transport aid and staff to Khartoum and other places in need. The WFP adds that it had begun 3 days of distributions in the capital on Saturday and had reached more than 12,000 people in Omdurman in areas controlled by the army, as well as the RSF. UNICEF spokesperson James Elder estimates that 13.6 million children in Sudan urgently need assistance. And still in Sudan, on the back of conflict, chaos and neglect, more children in Sudan today require life-saving support than ever before, with a staggering 13.6 million boys and girls urgently requiring assistance. According to the United Nations, this number represents more than the entire population of Sweden, or Rwanda or Portugal, and the number is growing. While UNICEF is unable to confirm estimates due to the intensity of the violence, reports say thousands have been injured. It says these reports of children killed or injured are only those who had contact with a medical facility, with nutrition services, safe water and healthcare all turned upside down. UNICEF is calling for $838 million to address the crisis, an increase of $253 million since the current conflict began. And Sudan's health sector is also facing a looming collapse as infrastructure and hospitals in many cities have been damaged or even completely destroyed by the violence that has had a catastrophic impact on civilians despite the ceasefire agreement. Hundreds have lost their lives and over 1.3 million people are estimated to be displaced. For more than 4 weeks, healthcare and medicine have not been available to patients in Khartoum, and they have been forced to seek them in other places. Among those patients, Adam Abubakar said that he had to walk for days to find a hospital, and he finally received help from doctors in Al-Hasahisa, over 100 kilometers from the capital. The Asahisa Hospital now works at maximum capacity to meet the daily needs of the increasing number of patients who come from Khartoum and other localities, and it has become one of the main healthcare facilities in Sudan after the capital's destruction. Away from the conflict in Sudan, North Korea's attempt to put a military spy satellite in space has failed after the second stage of the rocket malfunctioned. The new satellite vehicle rockets, Kolyma-1, crashed into the West Sea as it lost propulsion due to an abnormal startup of the engine and fuel system. North Korea's National Space Development Agency said it would investigate the failure urgently and carry out a second launch as soon as possible after new testing. However, neighboring South Korea said it had recovered what it believes to be parts of the space launch vehicle in the sea. Meanwhile, China's foreign ministry says meaningful dialogue with relevant parties should be initiated to address the current situation of the Korean peninsula following North Korea's satellite launch. Speaking at a news briefing in Beijing, Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said heightened tensions could only be quelled by addressing the lack of a peaceful mechanism on the Korean peninsula. Earlier on, the North satellite launch prompted emergency alerts and brief evacuation warnings on parts of South Korea and Japan. The flight was the nuclear-armed state's sixth satellite launch attempt and the first since 2016. In the meantime, a foreign policy expert, Elon Hughes, believes North Korea will stay resolute in its ambitions to put a military spy satellite into space despite its launch failure. According to Ms. Hughes, despite the launch failure, the attempt speaks to North Korea's continued honing of its capability and sharpening of its missile and nuclear weapons program.
On a high-level note, I think it speaks to North Korea's continued honing of its capability, sharpening its missile/nuclear weapons program, and still remaining resolute no matter what. And that's literally, when they say they'll try soon, obviously we don't know exactly when that'll be unless they make that explicit. But I think they are nonetheless resolute, and they don't care about what international law does say or alternatively doesn't say. Because of the Ukraine war, Russia's going to veto whatever the UN Security Council wants to do when it comes to like how to respond to North Korea, and I think China will do the same thing. So in that regard, North Korea, there's really not a lot of movement for the UN to really take action and be on a united front about North Korea, unfortunately.
Well, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says the military alliance will deploy an additional 700 troops to Kosovo to contain violence there. It comes after 30 NATO soldiers and 52 protesters were hurt in clashes. He was speaking ahead of a meeting of NATO foreign ministers in the Norwegian capital, saying such attacks are unacceptable and must stop.
We strongly condemn the unprovoked attacks against KFOR troops in northern Kosovo, which led to 30 peacekeepers being wounded. Such attacks are unacceptable and must stop. KFOR, the NATO forces, will take all necessary actions to maintain a safe and secure environment for all citizens in Kosovo. And we will continue to act impartially in line with our United Nations mandate. We have decided to deploy 700 more troops from the Operational Reserve Force for Western Balkans, and to put an additional battalion of reserve forces on higher readiness so they can also be deployed if needed. These are prudent steps to ensure that KFOR has the forces and capabilities it needs to fulfill its mandate. Violence sets back Kosovo and the entire region and puts Euro-Atlantic aspirations at risk. Both Pristina and Belgrade must take concrete steps to de-escalate the situation, refrain from further irresponsible behavior. Sweden will become a member. All allies have invited them to join, and their security is already stronger as a result. I'm in close and constant contact with Turkish authorities to ensure that Sweden becomes a full member as soon as possible.
Here in Nigeria, it's now 3 days after Nigeria's new president, Bola Tinubu, took the oath of office in a colorful event at the Eagle Square in Abuja, the nation's capital. While the president spoke on a myriad of issues in his inaugural speech, one of the major talking points is his comment on the fuel subsidy and how it can no longer be funded. He also spoke about security greatly, electricity, infrastructure, job creation, inclusion of women and youths in the administration, and foreign policy with Sudan, one of the major points there, as well as other conflicts in Africa. Well, the conversation continues. Joining me now is security expert David Otto, who joins me virtually from London. Hello, David. Right. So what are your expectations from Nigeria's new president, Bola Tinubu, and his administration, especially, in the area of security, which is your specialty? He says there will be reforms and funding for security agencies. Of course, the past administration of President Buhari also made a lot of promises and also claimed there were a lot of gains in the area of security. What are your thoughts about this? What are your expectations? What should the new administration do differently?
First of all, Nigeria is a very important nation, not just Nigerians, but globally. So one would expect, especially Nigerians would expect, that within the first 100 days of his administration, the first task, of the president, His Excellency Bola Ahmed Tinubu, would be to first of all unite the country, because of course this is a very key, important element. When it comes to national security and stability, you need to unite the nation in line with some of the concerns that people have had, that voters have had about the electoral system. So that needs to be sorted in order for him to bring back that trust, that citizens and the entire Nigerian need to be able to assist principally in stabilizing the country. So I think it's very important for him to buy the hearts and minds of the Nigerian population by bringing them along in order to gain some level of stability. I think that's one. Once that has been done, then of course, he will now be looking specifically, as you mentioned, on areas of national security. And again, you did, talk about the various, security crises that the country is experiencing within. You talk about the Boko Haram insurgency the bandits in the northwest, the so-called Eastern Regional Network in the southern part of the country, and also the so-called Fulani Herders conflict in the Middle Belt. So all this plethora of conflicts that do exist, the president will have to, within the 100 days, set up a strategy on how to deal with that. But of course, Nigerians want to know how he's going to also deal with the economy, as you mentioned. Talking about the removal of the fuel subsidy, the Nigerian National Petroleum Company, which of course will have a ripple effect on the way that Nigerians live on a daily basis. So these are very key issues. Of course, foreign policy will be important in trying to assist other countries in the region. Sudan, for example, would be at top of his agenda. But you've got to deal with the internal issues first. And he needs to do that within 100 days to set up an agenda on how that is going to be done.
Right. So, David, I'm wondering what the next 100 days will be like. You just spoke about him, having to have a buy-in of all Nigerians before we can talk about all other issues. But his very first speech, he talked about removal of fuel subsidy, as we have just discussed, a sore point for many Nigerians. As we speak, petrol stations, the very next day, they are already jerked up their, pump prices, letting many Nigerians buy fuel as high as some areas, 600 naira per litre. So how can he, ease in, the buying of Nigerians in the next 100 days? People are already talking. Yes, labor unions are already saying that he made a unilateral decision. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think this is one area where he needs to fish out the best economists. He talked about as somebody who, is very good in terms of delegation of work. So this is where he needs to bring in the best minds, from the economy. The ripple effect of increasing the fuel subsidy, it's, can be felt within the areas of transportation. People might not, be able to go to work. And once transportation does increase, it will have an effect on the price of food. It will have an effect on the price of, flights, people that want to travel out of the country. It will have an effect on the cost of electricity. A lot of Nigerians use, generators, as the main source of electricity. So all this ripple effect will mean that the ordinary Nigerian, will be left wanting. People, will still face the economic turmoil. Remember that we just had, quite a terrible fiscal policy, when the redesigning of the Naira notes, left a lot of people wondering, what was that about? So he has to still go back to that. So there are multifaceted areas within the economy which will have an impact on national stability, because, of course, we always talk about the economy in isolation, but this has an impact in terms of the way people think, how the people trust the government. And when people do not trust the state, and they feel that they are being left out or they are being shortchanged by the state, then they do not help national security in terms of its stability. So hand in gloves. And I think, he may want to look at this within his first 100 days, because this is quite...
Yeah, so he tried to paint it, as a good thing. He said that removal of subsidy means that you can pump more money into education, into health, into infrastructure, into creating more jobs and, many other things. Do you think this is what Nigerians will be thinking about right now? How, my children can go to school in a much better environment because subsidy has been removed?
I think you've got to look at the immediate impact. Then, of course, I think what the president is saying is he's looking more or less the long-term impact of, increasing or removing the fuel subsidy. But a lot of Nigerians will want to see what happens now. Remember, we still have the impact of COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, which has led to high prices of food. And then if you add that to the removal of the fuel, subsidy, then it's too much for too short a time for Nigerians to be able to cope. People are still recovering, from the Naira redesign, policy. So we're talking about, people being unable to eat, to work, to afford healthcare, to afford shelter, transportation, education. It's too much. And I think that, the president has to really sit down again, unite the country in terms of, perhaps its appointments that he's going to make, bring in those who can work with you to, put Nigerians at a point where they will become the giant of Africa that they need to be. At this point in time, a lot of Nigerians are saying, they're kind of lost in the waters, and they need a president who can find them the right way.
Yes, I was going to come to that. In the last couple of hours, we've seen, state governments, making new appointments, who's going to be in their cabinet, their aides, and all those sort of things. We're not seeing so much from the president in what you've just described. What kind of people do you think he should be bringing in? Should he look inwards, or as some other presidents have done, bring technocrats from outside of the country, Nigerians who are willing to come home and serve?
I think it needs to look both ways. I mean, Nigeria is a very dynamic state, or country, sorry, and it does mean that, you've got to look within and outside, bring people that are much more competent. This is a country that is currently suffering from recovering, perhaps, if I may use that word, from ethnic, religious, and, some kind of, cultural biases that, do exist, as we saw in the impact of the election. So he needs to really be quite precise, in terms of, in terms of how he does his appointments. The biggest mistake that he could make is to appoint people that are sycophants, people that would be yes men. He needs people that can stand for the stability of the nation. But ultimately, it is down to him what kind of legacy that he wants to leave. The good news for him is that, or perhaps, is that he may not be able to criticize the former government and say, it was the previous administration. This is the same party. So he has very little leeway to escape. And, I think that is one of the big, perhaps headaches that he will be having. That if he makes a mistake, then, of course, there is no one else to blame. He can't blame the previous administration because it's the same APC party. People are looking down on him to say, what next? But unifying the country will be his biggest strength. If he can do that, then other things will fall in place. That's what I think.
Right. So let's take it, to a broader level. Many governments have, signified interest and looking forward to working with Nigeria's new president after he took his oath of office on May 29th. We know that the president did mention in his speech on Monday about his primary foreign policy objective, which must be the peace and stability of West African sub-region and, of course, the African continent. He said, I quote, "We shall work with ECOWAS, the AU, and willing partners in the international community to end extant conflicts and to resolve new ones." Do you see this going beyond the African continent and extending to other parts of the world, especially with regards to the ongoing war in Ukraine? And of course, we did talk about Sudan.
Yes, of course. Nigeria is not called the giant of Africa for nothing. I mean, this is a very important country, and it is being viewed so. So I think it is down to the president to take that level and run with it, and give Nigeria the place that it does deserve. Yes, of course, he talked about working with ECOWAS, which is the regional body, the African Union. Nigeria needs to lead, not just, follow what other countries are doing. It's a very strategic nation. A lot of foreign countries, despite their reservations as to how the elections, went, will still want to work with Nigeria. And of course, the president does have to create that platform, to revive the position of Nigeria regionally, but also internationally. And I think the best way to do that is to get involved, to bring Nigeria to bear with some of the conflicts that are going on in other parts of the country. Now, the question a lot of people always ask is, what about the security issues in the country itself? Of course, you've got to deal with that. But this is not to say that because of insecurity in Nigeria, then, Nigeria's foreign policy should limit it from assisting other nations. It still has to do that. And, the earlier that a very robust foreign policy is established, the better it will be in terms of, bringing back the image that Nigeria does deserve to have internationally.
David, a pleasure having you join us to unravel all these issues on the program today.
Thank you.
And coming up after the break. UN Rights Chief Volker Turk raises concerns over UK migration bill. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the program. Let's take you to the United States, where supporters of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis reacted positively towards the governor as he kicked off his first campaign swing in Iowa as a presidential candidate. Mr. DeSantis bashed former U.S. President Donald Trump on issues such as immigration, COVID policy, and federal spending, suggesting that he had drifted away from conservative principles as president. Mr. DeSantis, who launched his campaign in a glitch-plagued virtual forum on Twitter last week, has now turned to old-school politicking, beginning with 2 days in Iowa and then on to New Hampshire and South Carolina.
I think DeSantis will do his best to make sure that we get back on track. DeSantis doesn't have the baggage, number one. And there's still a lot of legal things going on with Trump that we don't know what's going to happen. But I feel like recently on the news, Trump is saying, you know, don't just go and the Republicans don't agree with raising the debt ceiling. Now, why is that? You know, no matter what in this country, we need to protect our country and pay our debt somehow. And I think that Kevin McCarthy has done a very good job on working on that.
I think he did great. I was honestly undecided when I started, when I came in, and he said all the things that I wanted to hear, and he hit all the points. He's really just about the family, and I don't have one yet. I just got married a couple months ago, and so I just want a president that's going to protect my family. Yes, I think he's going to go all the way. I think he understands Americans, and I think he understands the middle class, and so I think he's going to do an amazing job.
I think it was a great opening speech. I mean, he kind of laid out a good case for why he'd make a great president. Well, and you know, I think he's proven in Florida that he actually can take the positions and get the job done. You know, I think he makes a good point too that it's really going to take 8 years, and I think we need a candidate who won't be divisive and can actually get independents to also vote for him.
Well, U.S. House Republican Conference Chair Elise Stefanik said the debt ceiling bill, which was a win for the American people and future generations, legislation brokered by U.S. President Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to lift the $31.4 trillion US debt ceiling and achieve new federal spending cuts past an important hurdle, advancing to the full House of Representatives for debate. The House Rules Committee voted 76 to approve the rules, allowing debate by the full chamber. Two committee members, Republicans Chip Roy and Ralph Norman, bucked their leadership by opposing the bill. That vote underscored the need for Democrats to help pass the measure in the House, which is controlled by Republicans.
Conference meeting. Members from all across the conference shared their support for this important bill, and they shared their support for Speaker McCarthy's strong and effective leadership. This is a win for the American people and future generations. Last November, the American people sent a message strongly that they did not support the failed policies and reckless spending of single-party Democrat rule. The country entrusted House Republicans with our vision of a commitment to America to deliver results and rein in out-of-control spending, causing crippling inflation. The Fiscal Responsibility Act is a historic step to restoring fiscal sanity and holding Washington accountable. This will be the largest deficit reduction in history. country. For the first time in a decade, spending year over year will be cut while still providing critical funding for veterans and national defense. This deal claws back tens of billions in unspent COVID funds, the largest rescission combined in the history of Congress. And this deal will lift millions of Americans out of poverty by strengthening work requirements. Since earning the majority, House Republicans have been underestimated by the media every day. We've been underestimated by the media this week, but we will be tireless in keeping our promises and delivering results for the American people.
Look, there's been a lot of hard work and a lot of late nights that have gone into changing the spending trajectory in this town that has brought us to this point where we've got over $31 trillion in debt. And tonight is no different. You see how late it is? The work's not going to stop for a long time. There's a lot of work that needs to continue to go into fixing all of the problems that President Biden has created. You see inflation through the roof. You see the struggles that hardworking families are experiencing because Washington went on a multi-trillion-dollar spending binge over the last 2 years. And Joe Biden didn't want that spending binge to end. But the American people had a different idea when they elected a House Republican majority committed to finally getting spending under control in Washington. And that's what this bill is about.
Meanwhile, the White House Budget Chief Shalanda Young says there is no indication that the so-called X date for when the U.S. government would run out of funds to pay all its bills would slip back from June the 5th. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says the government will default if Congress does not increase the nation's $31.4 trillion debt ceiling by June the 5th.
I have always thought the majority of members, Democrats and Republicans, did not want to take us even to the brink of default. I think this bill shows that that assessment was correct, and we have to keep our eye on the prize that passing this bill, getting it to the president, avoids the catastrophic thing that would hurt millions of Americans. And there's a reason world leaders were worried about this. This would have impacted the global economy.
Let's expand this. VOA's White House correspondent Anita Powell joins me now for more. Hello, Anita.
Hello.
So give us updates on the U.S. debt ceiling conversation, particularly about the speculations of the deadline date when the U.S. government would run out of funds to pay its bills.
Right. So the latest date that you just heard Shalanda Young, the head of the OMB, mention is June 5th. That's a revised date up from June 1st. But the moral of the story is that nobody really knows. This is a very complicated calculation. This is harder than calculus. This is the U.S. government calculating how much money comes in every day and how much money has to go out every day. And we're talking about tens of billions of dollars. So right now, June 5th is the date, and that is what Congress thinks that they think they can beat that date to vote on this bill. But this is really a matter of speculation and calculation and probability. So June 5th is the best guess we've got right now.
So House Republican Conference Chair Lee Stefanik says the debt ceiling bill was a win for the American people and future generations. Do you think the deal will help cut spending and reduce the budget deficits?
So the Congressional Budget Office just put out a new study on this, saying that they believe that this bill, if it's passed as it is written, will cut the federal deficit by $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years. But that's dependent on a lot of factors. What could happen in the next 10 years? 10 years ago, we certainly weren't expecting a global pandemic. We certainly weren't expecting some of the trends that have affected the global economy today. So that is the estimate right now. So far, she is on solid ground making that claim, but a lot could change in 10 years.
So the Rules Committee, that's the House Rules Committee, voted 7-6 to advance the debt ceiling bill yesterday. But the final passage vote is due to hold today. What should many expect?
A long debate. I would get that popcorn, get yourself comfortable, settle in and watch. We're going to hear a lot of rhetoric, especially from the House Freedom Caucus, which is the hard right of the House. And they are going to say that they wanted stricter spending cuts, more work requirements for beneficiaries of these entitlement programs and food stamps and whatnot. And we're going to hear a lot of rhetoric about this. If that vote was any indication last night, the very narrow 7-6 vote, we might squeak by with a vote on this. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has assured, the White House has assured the public that they are going to pass this, and this is going to go to the Senate and go speedily, therefore, to the president's desk. But I think there's going to be a lot of rhetoric, a lot of drama, and a lot of representatives making their points about their dissatisfaction with this bill. But as Shalanda Young said yesterday, this 99-page bill, nobody is exactly happy about it. And you know what? That's divided government. That's compromise. That's democracy. Not everybody is going to be happy at all times.
Right. So we, as you just said, we do know how the voting went 7-6, but, the regular Democrats and Republicans, how are they reacting to this? What have been the feelings that you've been getting?
Right. So we're hearing dissatisfaction on both sides, but also both sides are trying to frame this as a win for their side because, this was a very, very high stakes negotiation. They were staring down the X date. So the Republican side is saying, we did manage to cut spending. That was our main objective. And the Democratic side is saying we managed to keep some of these programs that were so important to the American people. So that's how it's being presented by both sides as a modest win. And that does portend for swift passage if, as I said, both sides are equally unhappy with this budget bill. But that means it'll probably have a swifter rise to the president's desk.
So there's a lot of, a bated breath being held by many Americans waiting for that final day. And, as if many people's situations could not be made worse. What's the current living situation, welfare situation like for individuals and business owners in the United States, even with this whole economic crisis?
Well, let me throw out a few statistics that I think will hit home for a lot of Nigerians. Right now, we're seeing food prices up by 11% in the United States. This, of course, affects every American who needs to eat, which is every American. And so that is hurting households. That is definitely affecting households. The other big trend we've seen is that the Fed has increased interest rates to 5 to 5.25%, which I realize sounds pretty modest compared to Nigeria's 18%. But that is a big jump in the United States from the 3% that it was just about a year ago. And so you have families who are maybe looking to move, who cannot afford to take out a loan at these interest rates to buy a new house. So we are going to see a little bit of slowing of the housing market, which is going to affect a lot of families. The other thing that is interesting is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics said just yesterday, I believe, that there are 10.1 million open jobs in the United States, which is considered to be a problem for employers, but also a pretty good sign of a growing economy if more jobs are being created. So it's a really mixed picture. But I think overall, a lot of Americans are looking at their daily expenses, specifically food, specifically petrol, and those have risen. And that is just eating into a lot of family budgets.
Well, all the best to everyone. Well, Anita, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Let's move on. United Nations Human Rights Chief Volker Turk says he has formally conveyed his concerns over a new British migration law to the government, saying he was worried it would bar people from seeking asylum. Speaking in an interview, Mr. Turk said that he was concerned that the 1951 Refugee Convention was being thrown to the wind, especially by Western countries, including Britain. Stopping small boat arrivals from across the Channel is a top priority for UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's government, and the new illegal migration bill was approved by the UK's lower house of Parliament last month.
To look at when it comes to the current legislation that is going through, I think we are at the stage where it goes to the House of Lords, this Illegal Migration Act. Yes, we have very serious concerns from an international refugee law and from an international human rights law perspective, because it would essentially bar people from seeking asylum in the UK if they come through a certain way. And it would also lead to all kinds of restrictions that they would face. And again, this raises huge concerns from a human rights perspective. It's the easy thing for politicians to do when you are faced with a complex issue. You focus on those things that make the headlines and placate a certain segment of your constituencies. But it's not going to solve the issue. So I don't understand how in the global north, when the numbers are much less, I mean significant, cannot even be compared, there is all this kerfuffle about, or hysteria about it, when frankly it shouldn't be the case. Because one can deal with it if one sits down, thinks through the issue, looks at the law and applies it.
Elsewhere, Tesla's chief executive officer, Elon Musk, has kicked off his second day of a trip to China with a visit to the country's Commerce Ministry. Mr. Musk was accompanied by Tesla's China-based public affairs chief, Grace Tao, and head of global manufacturing, Tom Zhu. He's expected to meet other senior Chinese officials and visit the U.S. electric vehicle maker's Shanghai plant later in the week. China's foreign ministry spokesperson Mao Ning says that China has released readouts on Mr. Musk's relevant meetings, and she had no further information to add during the regular news briefing. When we come back on the program. There you have it. Details in a moment. Later on, we'll take a look at the Russian clothing brands, how they plug the gap left by Western rivals. But we begin from Ukraine, where the police said that they evacuated 3 orphans from the frontline town of New York in eastern Donetsk region. Video released by police in the Telegram messaging app channel showed that a police officer helped children to put on reflective jackets and helmets before they boarded a vehicle. The police officer said the children were first taken to the medical facility for examination before reuniting with their relatives. New York lies some 50 kilometers to the north of the separatist stronghold of Donetsk and 50 kilometers to the south of Bakhmut. The Donetsk region has seen the heaviest fighting since February 2022, with the fiercest battles raging for the cities of Bakhmut, Advitka, and Volodar. Russia and Ukraine have not committed to respect the 5 principles laid out by International Atomic Energy Agency Chief Rafael Grossi to try to safeguard Ukraine's Russia-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Mr. Grossi, who spoke at the UN Security Council, has tried for months to craft an agreement to reduce the risk of a catastrophic nuclear accident from military activity like shelling at Europe's biggest nuclear power plant. After addressing the Council, Mr. Grossi highlighted the fact that no party had rejected the plan outright since no representative had voiced opposition to the principles.
The important thing is that the minimum common denominator, which are these basic 5 principles, have been widely supported, and there was no voice opposing them. This is very important. This indicates that what we are saying is something no one has a contradictory view upon. And we are, in any case, going to be getting the information and transmitting it to the Ukrainian regulator for their information, which is a mitigation. It's not an ideal situation, but again, it indicates the usefulness of the presence of the IAEA to bridge these gaps. You know, the IAEA has maybe one single power. It is the power of the pen. And we report immediately, and the international community will know immediately from an authoritative source what is happening. We believe that this is a deterrent factor in case anybody would have the idea to attack a nuclear power plant. It's not enough. We need peace. We need the complete stabilization of the situation.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is calling for further military assistance to Ukraine, saying the new Ammunition Production Act had just been proposed. Speaking during the security conference Globsec in Bratislava, she said the European Commission launched a plan to use more than 500 million euros to help European arms firms boost capacity by upgrading equipment, opening production lines and training staff. Artillery rounds, particularly 155mm shells, have become critical to the conflict as Ukrainian and Russian forces wage an intense war of attrition.
This is the origin. For the first time in our history, a country is under attack because of its desire to be part of the European family. President Putin is trying to destroy the work of peace that we have built together since the end of the Second World War and later the fall of the Iron Curtain. The immediate need, you know it, is the military assistance to sustain the efforts of the Ukrainian armed forces. And this is why we have just proposed an Ammunition Production Act. We want to push our defense industry to ramp up production of badly needed 155 and 152 millimeters artillery shells. And those who can should provide long-range artillery and weapon systems that can help Ukraine level the battlefield gap in range to the invading forces. We extended to the Western Balkans the very same solidarity measures that we have taken inside our union. We have supported vulnerable households against high energy costs. We're building new infrastructure to reduce the Western Balkans' dependency on Russian fossil fuels. And this practical cooperation has run in parallel with progress on the EU path. Recent tensions are, of course, concerning. I call on all sides to step away from confrontation and to take measures to restore calm. But today I want to present a new initiative to seize this important moment in the region. It is a new growth plan for the Western Balkans. We want to build on the progress achieved in the recent months. But we also want to bring some of the benefits of EU membership to the people of Western Balkans already today.
Well, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has urged Turkey to immediately finalize Sweden's accession to NATO, saying the Nordic country had already taken significant steps to address Ankara's objections to its membership. Speaking in Luleå, northern Sweden, Mr. Blinken also rejected the suggestion that Turkey's approval of Sweden's NATO bid was linked to the sale of its F-16 fighter jets to Ankara. Addressing a joint press conference with the Swedish Prime Minister, Mr. Blinken said Washington was going to continue to work to complete Sweden's secession in time for a mid-July NATO summit that will bring together the heads of state of the alliance.
Both Turkey and Hungary, which is also not yet ratified, to ratify the accession as quickly as possible. There is no reason for any further time. Sweden is ready now. That decision should move forward now. Sweden, again and again, has proven its commitment to NATO, to its values, to its mission, to its members. A strong, vibrant democracy with highly capable forces that have been working shoulder to shoulder with NATO members for years, for decades. It is fully dedicated to upholding the commitments that underpin our alliance, including Article 5. By joining NATO, Sweden undertakes a commitment to the security of every other ally. No one should doubt that commitment. And of course, every other ally will be committed to Sweden's security. We will continue to work to complete Sweden's accession by the time our leaders gather in Vilnius for the NATO summit.
Turkish counterpart on this specific issue, of course. So, and just to reiterate what I've said before, I mean, we have always known that two things. One is we have a memorandum, we are fulfilling it, and the very final part of that is actually being put into force June 1st, that is the day after tomorrow, when the new piece of legislation, actually, in counterterrorism, and that's an important step, and thereby we have done what we told our Turkish friends, and within the framework of the trilateral memorandum, very, very important. And we acknowledge the fact that they have good reasons to have had concern.
And finally, on the program, Russian designers and brands are helping the retail sector gradually recover from a turbulent 15 months of store closures and slumping in demand, with new labels plugging the gap left by foreign rivals and shoppers tentatively returning. Some stores in central Moscow, which sat idle for over a year in response to Russia dispatching troops to Ukraine in February 2022, last month reopened under new management and a new brand, leaving customers largely satisfied. Oleg Klimov, the president of Russia's Council of Shopping Centers, said retail sales, a key gauge of consumer demand, slumped in 2022, hit by soaring inflation and falling wages, while the Western exodus contributed to heavy industry losses.
Last year was really difficult for Russia, for Russian business especially, and I can say that now we are trying to cope with it, and the biggest problem is international transaction. You know, our field, our industry is extremely dependent on import, and we have some difficulties with international transactions, I think. The biggest one is shortage of staff. I mean, we don't have enough seamstresses and professionals in technology. So I think it's a big problem. So how we can cope with it? I have no idea. Maybe we need to ask our government to make some campaign, or even propaganda activities in order to make this profession more popular, because we have lack of this stuff, and it's a big problem. I think the textile industry, I have no idea how we can achieve even level of Turkey industry, for example. It's very difficult industry, and we don't have enough brains in this field.
Well, that's the show today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joker Rogers. Bye for now.